Welcome back to Raised by Giants live discussion. Good to see everyone in the chat and any moderators and channel members out there and anyone that's listening to the replay of this show. Thanks for joining us here today. And if you're listening on the audio only, because the show is also a podcast, so be sure to follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and you can download the audio only episodes on whatever podcast platform you listen to. The show drops on those platforms almost immediately after it's released here. Also, we are a viewer supported show. We don't have any sponsorships, no advertising or affiliate programs. It's just me. So to help support the show, PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description. And also, if you would like to send in super chats and super stickers, if you would have a question or a comment that you would like to have highlighted during the show, channel memberships are also available and are a great way to help support the show monthly. And by becoming a channel member, you get access to bonus episodes for signing up to be a channel member. There's a huge back catalog. Click the more button underneath the title of this video to the drop down of the description. All the links are there that you need, including my guest links as well. And speaking of guests, on with us today, we have esoteric author, researcher, and world traveler Hans Dietrich. Welcome to the show, my friend. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me on, Ryder. This is amazing. I love your stuff. I've been following you for a bit, and really appreciate what you and Jay Widener have been putting together. This stuff's really amazing content. So good on you guys for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for checking it out. And thank you for watching it. And thanks for the reminder. Clockwork Shining on Amazon Prime and Apple TV Plus and on Vimeo. The links are in the description of that video. Well, of this video. So do you think, Hans, that we're really supposed to, we were kind of talking about this before the show started. Do you think that we're supposed to know all the secrets of the universe? Like, I mean, we're here for a very short amount of time compared to everything else. You know, some buildings stand longer than people's lifespans. You know, the oldest structure in the world, I believe, is Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And that was built, I think, estimated between 9600 BCE, you know, and that's a lot of humans ago, you know, and the oldest actual building in the world is the Pantheon in Rome, Italy, which was built around 125 AD. That's a lot of people ago too. So this idea that we're supposed to have everything figured out is complete and utter bollocks to me. You know, what would even really be the point of actually being here if we already knew everything? It doesn't really make any sense to me.
It doesn't. And as we were saying, you know, possibly we keep coming back here lifetime after lifetime. We keep coming back to polish our diamond a little bit more before, you know, we ascend. We become all-knowing beings, if even that is the case. But it's interesting that you talk about architecture, because in architecture and ancient structures, a lot of the knowledge of that time is placed in these monuments that are, as you say, somewhat timeless. And so even though we're not living these long extended lifespans, the monuments and structures that we leave behind certainly are. And so there's definitely something that can be learned from all these. I actually believe Karen Tepe is a little bit older than Göbekli Tepe now that they've started, you know, carbon dating what they've been able to carbon date or find. Everybody seems to think that we can carbon date stone, but we can't. We can only carbon date, you know, organic materials around stone or on stone. And so this could be stuff from lichen. It could be, you know, human remains or elements that have been left there. It's interesting, lichen grows at a specific rate over the course of time, depending on elevation. And so you go to somewhere like Peru and you go up into the, you know, the Andes, basically the region around there, up into the Sacred Valley, outside of Cusco, up to Ollantaytambo. And the lichen patches on some of the stonework there are massive. And so this indicates longevity, longer than we're being told that, you know, has gone on at a lot of these sites. And so are we just, you know, rinsing and repeating history over and over and over again? We come to a crescendo and a climax, and then we restart again. You know, this is kind of how the Yuga cycles go, or to the ancient Cometians. This is how the phases of the sun or the phases of our life go. We go through different phases of our sun every day, and we go through different phases in our life. And so it's really a good question as to what is our antiquity, what is our legacy. And now that we're, you know, calling ourselves the most sophisticated societies in the world right now, I don't really see that, considering we're still headfirst in war and poverty and all sorts of things that we could definitely solve with, you know, all of this amazing technology and money that we have, but we choose not to. And so what is our legacy going forward? What's going to remain of our, city structures and buildings? Who knows?
I don't think very much. I mean, if you just look at the way that things, dissipate and erode over just 100 years, I feel like anything that we've built in modern time in recent times in a couple of 100 years is all going to be gone, and there's like going to be very little trace of that we were even here. If something happened and we all just disappeared, like right now, I honestly feel like in a couple of 100 years, it would be like we didn't even exist.
Yeah, nature would regrow itself, similar to what we see in the Amazon. I mean, once they started doing, satellite and plane-based radar over the Amazon and lidar, they're discovering huge city complexes that would house millions of people. And most of the Amazon, as we know, was terra preta, so it's mostly man-made. But over the course of history, it's grown over everything, and we don't even know what's there anymore because it's all jungle.
Yeah, that's what the new Graham Hancock, what is it, Ancient Apocalypse season
Right?
two gets
He talks
into.
a lot about that. He talks about that in his second book, from Fingerprints of the Gods, and Magicians of the Gods. He talks a bit about terra preta down there as well. And we're coming close to figuring out exactly what they were doing. If you are a farmer or you do grow your own food and stuff, using charcoal and activated biocharcoal is amazing because this is kind of a way of making your own soil into a terra preta. So we're discovering ways of the old that hopefully will help us move forward.
Well, you've been to, I believe, 22 different countries, including Peru, Mexico, Egypt, Nepal, India, and the list goes on and on and on. What have you found that's like connecting tissue to like all these sites? Do you think that a lot of these famous, megalithic structures are somehow connected in any kind of way?
We see the fingerprints of specific types of stonemasonry, and we see this in Peru. We see this all over Turkey. We see this all over Egypt. There's bits and pieces of similarity in Cambodia, in India, even in Russia, in places where they've started discovering some ancient sites. And so, at some point, the knowledge of how to cut these stones in specific ways with interlocking grooves or curved back surfaces seems to have permeated from culture to culture to culture. Maybe it's a hundredth monkey syndrome, or maybe there was a common architect or architectural or masonry, stone masonry type of school that allowed the best and the bright in those fields to actually share this information and bring this technology to different parts of the world in ancient times.
Yeah, that's been my kind of thought for a long time is like, what if all these megalithic structures are like connected in some kind of way? What if they're like all put on like certain energetic vortexes or like on certain ley lines and they're all kind of like lined up and they create this big, large system? Because there's been so many theories about what the pyramid of Giza really is. Some people think it's like a power plant, like some kind of machinery, some kind of electrical device or something. And I was like, well, you'd have to have a central location. If it was some kind of electrical device or like a power plant or something, you would have to have something powering that device, right?
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Having been to Giza twice now, and having been in the Great Pyramid 3, 4 times now, which is pretty amazing. There's some interest around that because my favorite spot on the pyramid isn't the king's chamber, it isn't the queen's chamber, it's actually the subterranean. Because when you go down there, you see the evidence of water damage. It's very evident. There's a well shaft. The well shaft goes down, it's conveniently cemented over. There's what they call the dead end shaft. I've gone to the end of that, while everybody is still touring through the king's chamber and the queen's chamber. I like to be the first one down there. And I will climb down to the end of that tunnel. It is tiny. It's a little bit over a meter by a meter, and then it goes about 70 feet back, and you're kneeing yourself over just ripped up bedrock. And it's interesting, there's about an inch of salt on the ceiling that people have engraved their, graffitied their names into, which is another evidence that there was a water flow that was coming through there. And the back of it is cemented over again conveniently, and there's a drill hole through it. So obviously there's something else that moves past that. And if you start looking at some of the other tunnel structures underneath the Giza plateau, a lot of them align with where that well shaft and where the dead end shaft would come out, especially the Osiris shaft. And so in the Osiris shaft, you go down, I believe it's a little over 150 feet down, but you're going down what would be the equivalent of about 10 stories of a building here, in our modern world with our 9-10 foot ceilings, whatever. And you go down into it and you go down 3 different layers, and the bottom layer is, submerged in about 2 to 3 feet of water, even possibly even more. And this is the natural water that comes underneath the Giza plateau. And recently I was listening to somebody trying to debunk all this, and he's like, oh, Giza wasn't built over massive water. Well, it was. And not only was it built over massive water, but there are tunnel systems underneath Giza. I say they stack about 10 deep, and they're the size of the inside of like semi-car trailers. And some of these go out 50, 60 kilometers out into the Western desert. Well, what is the purpose of these? Well, they were bringing water to the sites. And so you were mentioning ley lines earlier, and you look at sites in Peru, and you look at some of the major sites in Egypt and elsewhere around the world. A lot of them are associated with ley lines, and a lot of those ley lines are associated with massive water. And so water is interesting because not only does it flow, it's its own current in a sense, but it can help with movement of electricity. You can harness water through pressure. You can cut sharper than diamond with water if you can create the right pressure with it. And you can float and levitate things on water using its own pressure system and balances. And so seeing that water had bubbled up into the bottom chambers of the Great Pyramid is very interesting, because this leads into Christopher Dunn, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but they talk about possibility of it being a ram pump or some sort of a pumping mechanism that would burp and create hydrogen. It would break off the hydrogen, which then with a mixture of elixirs and chemicals would allow a piezoelectric spark to affect, and you would have a generator, quite literally. Here we are looking at the Osiris shaft. Don't go down the ladder on the right. It is the most rickety ladder you will ever go down.
It looks pretty crickety.
It's attached by like 3 bolts.
That was the OG ladder.
Yeah, right.
The original ladder. So who was it that kind of blew the lid on this being like this underground chamber underneath the pyramid? Because yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna sorry. In the 90s, there was a video that came out. I think it was on ABC News, where a reporter had gone with Zahi Hawass down into it. So if you pause on this photo, basically Zahi Hawass had drained and pumped out all the water because he wanted to get into the box, which you can kind of see in the foreground. And this box it's a green quartzite, and it comes from Lebanon, and it's very mysterious because it's all one piece of stone, as actually all of the boxes are in Egypt. And even without its lid, it does not fit down any of the carved shafts and tunnel systems that lead down there. It just doesn't. It's the wrong dimensions, and so it really beggars the question: how on earth did it get down there? Now, what you don't see in this photo in this room is there were 4 pillars. You can see kind of the broken parts of 2 of the pillars. There's one behind that wooden scaffolding, and then the other 2 are behind whoever's taking this photo. But this is all fresh water. And when we were down there with Yusuf Ayawan, he was, tasting the water going, wow, it's really sweet, because it's being filtered through all the limestone and the natural bedrock and the granite down there, that it's acting as a filtration system. Yeah, unfortunately, tourists like to throw their trash, and so do the locals. And so there's a lot of, unfortunately, cosmetic pollution around the area. But the interesting aspects of this are, where do those other 2 shafts go? Because at the back of the room, there's a shaft that goes to the right. So that would end up underneath literally the well shaft in the Great Pyramid. And there's a shaft that goes to the left. Where does that go? And so this goes into some of the other extensive tunnel systems that are underneath there. And as Zahi was, pumping all this out, they found absolutely nothing in this, what they called a sarcophagus, when they lifted the lid on it. And so it beggars the question, what were these boxes used for if they weren't, using them for burial systems?
Well, there's some sarcophagi there's two of them at the bottom where the water is, correct?
There's one. There's a
There's
there's
just
a
one?
lot. There's a large reset that goes down, and then in that reset is this green quartzite box, and it comes literally. They've figured out from its strata that it comes out of Lebanon, and so not only did it come from Lebanon, several hundred to 1,000 miles away, but it somehow ended up at the bottom of the Osiris shaft with no visible means of getting it down there. So, hmm.
Aren't there some other sarcophagi down there as well? Isn't there like another room that
on
has like a
on
bunch of
the
them?
on the layer above it, there's 7 alcoves. Four of them have some pretty crude, rudimentary sarcophagi that I think people were actually buried in, but these aren't from the times, obviously, when this was built. And then there's a black box in there that's smaller than the ones that you see at the Serapeum, but it's fascinating because it has this oily substance covering it. And I think this is creosote that comes from fires being burned down there. They leave that residue. Living in Nepal, you see that a lot in the villages because they don't have a lot of ventilation. And so all the kitchen smoke bellows out through the front door underneath their awning. And anything that you place up there is just going to be covered in this. It's like a waxy, oily creosote. It's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, that's really interesting and how they got those down. So it's basically meaning that the pyramid had to have been built on top of these sarcophagi. Like the sarcophagi already
And
had to be there and then the pyramid built on top of it.
Right, and we're not taught this in history, but there's a vast underground, as I was saying, underground complex underneath Giza. And so we're just told, oh, the pyramids, they built them here. And it's like, but what was built underneath it? And how old are those structures? Were they being utilized to help build the pyramids, or were they there a lot further past in antiquity? And the fact that you have these tunnels going out into the Western desert is even more fascinating because when the Germans were doing a lot of satellite scans and aerial photography of the area, they realized that most of that Western desert from Libya down into Egypt was a massive water spillover from the Mediterranean. And so this could have been from the Holocene Comet event. Allegedly, a comet broke up over North America into several pieces, and all those pieces splashed down into the ice sheet all the way down into Lebanon. And so big chunks of them could have splashed down on the Mediterranean, which would have flowed up and over the berm of Northern Africa, which at that time would have been all jungle. And so now it's all desert because, the salt water of the Mediterranean would have pretty much killed off any ability for massive plant growth to exist there any longer. And it's interesting that prior to our unfortunate, demise of Libya, Gaddafi found this massive underground water aquifer right there in the desert that borders basically Libya, Sudan, and Egypt. And it's huge. It's one of the largest water aquifers in the world. And so he started this Water One project that would feed Libya, Sudan, and Egypt for free because he felt that everybody shared this water together. And I only stumbled into it because I was looking at the time, I was working for a company called Precycle, which allows products and tools and things packaging that you're making basically to already have its recycling lifestyle baked into it so that we don't have to come back to it a second time around and go, oh, maybe we need to discover a way to recycle this. And so I was looking into refurbishing piping and drainage systems, because a lot of this stuff, and if a huge sewer pipe or drainage pipe has a crack in it, you can't use it. So you just leave it derelict. And I started noticing all these derelict tunnel systems and tubes out in the Libyan and Egyptian desert. And it's like, why can't you repurpose these? You can cut them in half. You can create, water reservoirs. You can create, potable soil reservoirs for them. You can use them to, board off both ends. You can put livestock in there. You can put, your crop in there to dry out, like wheat or any harvest that you have. You can use them for military installations. You can recut them into barricades. I mean, there's so many uses for them rather than the desert just eating them up and devouring over time. And so that's when I started realizing, oh my God, there's this massive water aquifer underneath this huge portion of the Egyptian desert. And when you start looking into it, well, it makes sense because you have the Nile there. And over time, the Nile shifted over to where the Nile is now, which is on the other side of Giza. But the fact that there are these massive tunnel systems going out to where once this massive water structure was is indication that they were bringing water to the sites.
So to get underneath the Great Pyramid of Giza to see these chambers and get to the subterranean level, because I've never been there, I've always wanted to go. But you've been there, you've been boots on the ground there, so it's perfect for me to ask you these questions. Do you have to go inside of the pyramid to get down underneath the pyramid, or does the access point outside
No,
around the pyramid?
it's on the north face of the pyramid. They found the original entrance, which was closed off by a shifting bellow system, which is why I think there was this water mechanism that would burp whenever anything would happen. And then the tomb robber bombed. He dynamited a section next to that, and then started digging into it.
Yeah, that's how
And
they originally got into it, right?
yeah,
The
correct.
entrance isn't the original.
Mahmoud's tunnel, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you kind of skirt around, and you end up where the downward shaft meets both the shaft up to the king's chamber and the shaft into the queen's gallery. They all kind of meet up at this little corridor in the central area, and it's interesting that he was even able to find that, quite honestly, because if you see the way that the tunnel is dug, it digs out to the right and then it scoops back into the left. And I think partially when they were digging it, they heard something fall, and that's why they started going back toward the left. And then they ended up meeting at this central junction where the Queen's Chamber, the King's Chamber, and the subterranean all meet up. To get in the pyramids, it's not very difficult. I mean, you can go to Egypt on your own. You pay about $300 at the front gate, and they give you less than 20 minutes, and you're only allowed to go to the King's Chamber.
Hmm.
You're not allowed to do any sacrifices, rituals, marriages, religion, chanting. You're not allowed to do any of this in there because obviously, oh, excuse me, I thought I turned my phone off.
You mean I can't summon Cthulhu inside of the pyramids, bro?
You might be able to. When you get on a private tour, though, and usually these private tours have 30, 40 to the second tour I was on, we had 82 people on the tour. But we had, 5 speakers. We had Yusuf Iwan, we had Patricia, we had Brian Forrester, Hugh Newman, and Andrew Collins, and so it was a massive undertaking. And I ended up becoming a manager on the second half of that tour because with 82 people, it's very difficult for to keep track of everybody, especially when you get to sites like Karnak. But when you're going on these tours with a larger group, you pay for private access into a lot of these sites that generalized tourists never get access to, unless you have an amazing guide who knows people and can pay off the vig or the bucksheesh to get the guy with the keys to unlock rooms for you. But on the private tours, you get up to 3 hours inside of the Great Pyramid. You go in at sunset and you come out when it's pitch black outside. You first go up into the King's Chamber, and the first thing people do when they get up there is they start chanting, because the harmonic frequency in the King's Chamber it's at F, which is interesting. So you hit this F tone. I can dual split when I chant, so you kind of get a double split in there. But with everybody chanting in there and yourself, you kind of feel very uplifted because you're surrounded by all this amazing granite, and it's a beautiful experience. But then when you get into the box, the king's altar, the king's box, the box tunes at A sharp. So that's either a fifth forward or a third. Sorry, it's a third forward or a fifth backward from F. And so when you're in the box toning and everybody else outside of you is toning at that other frequency, you feel like you're having an out-of-body experience. It's very prolific. It's very similar to, I don't know if you've ever done a flotation or if anybody in your crowd has ever done like an isolation chamber or flotation,
I
like a
have, yes.
float tank. It's very similar to that. You feel like you're weightless. You're in the middle of the universe. Nothing is around you. It's pretty amazing. And then everybody from there meanders down to the Queen's Chamber, and I'm always the first one. The second they open the Queen's Chamber, they open the gate to go down to the subterranean. I'm always the first person down there because I want to go from having this uplifting experience, this out of body experience in the box and in the King's Chamber, to a very grounded experience at the end of the dead end shaft. And so I will climb down to the end of the dead end shaft. I'll turn my torch out. I'll get into lotus position. I might chant for tone down there for about a minute, and then I go completely silent. And the noise that you hear down there is so overwhelming, it's unbelievable. But you're not hearing any external noise. You're hearing your own body. And so that's why I say it's one of the most grounding experiences, having come out of, being in the King's Chamber and the very much uplifting experience there.
As above, so below, baby.
Right. Bingo. And so it beggars the question, what is the oldest part of the Great Pyramid? And a lot of us think it is the subterranean. We think that that was built long before the pyramid was ever built, primarily because down there you don't have any block work like you do in the rest of the pyramid. It's all cut out of the bedrock. And as I said, it looks like there's been an extended period of time of rushing water over a lot of the stonework that is down there because it's just melted away from the water. And this is bedrock, so you're using water to basically eat through granite. So and limestone in a sense. It's really interesting to see.
So was the original, is there another access point to get into the subterranean layer underneath the pyramid,
Other
or is there only one?
other than the well shaft and the dead end shaft, which we don't know where they go, the well shaft goes down about 30 feet and then it's cemented off. And about 20 feet down, you can see that there are tunnels going off from that. And so there could have possibly been other ways that people could have gotten into it in the ancient past. But as far as I know, and as far as other scholars that I've researched have suggested, people really didn't go into the pyramid until Mahmud dynamited his way in. There wasn't really, they didn't know where the front entrance was because it was all stoned off by some of the stonework on the outside. And so then it also beggars the question, well, how old is the pyramids, or are the pyramids? Because we talk about the water damage on the back of the Sphinx, which has been bricked over, or the back wall of the Sphinx enclosure, which Dr. Robert Schock and John Anthony West have talked a lot about. Schock, conservatively estimates that it's 10,000 years old, but he's willing to go back as far as 35,000 years in his estimations as well, just because there was no significant rain, water, or runoff that would have created those kind of striations or fissures. But when you're standing at the Sphinx and you're looking at all three pyramids, you can clearly see, without a shadow of a doubt, water damage 2/3 of the way up all the pyramids. It's once you see it, you will not unsee it. And there's a lot of speculation around the middle pyramid because it still has the casing stones around the top, and you can see the line where the water was, but you can also see where the waves were breaking and taking out part of the upper structure because you have a waveform pattern going around it, where the casing stones are still accessible at the top of the middle pyramid. And the middle pyramid's really interesting because there aren't a lot of chambers inside of it that we know about, and most of them are at surface level or subterranean. And so what is in the rest of that pyramid? Where the Great Pyramid, you can go up into it and there's obviously structures and systems within inside of it, but we don't really see that within the middle pyramid. And I know that there's been some new reports that have come out from the Japanese group that was doing the muon testing in all three pyramids that suggests that there might be chambers in the upper section as well as a new chamber above the Grand Gallery in the Great Pyramid.
That would suggest like a massive amount of flooding, like a great flood. And that could have been a reason why all these underground tunnels were built, because they possibly knew that this giant flood was coming. And that's how they survived the flood. And they just sealed off the pyramid and wait until the floodwaters come down and then come back up to the top. Kind of like the Hopi
Interesting.
ant people, you know?
Or Cappadocia, or Darren Kuya in Turkey. You have these massive underground cities that could house 30,000 people, livestock, stores, water. A lot of them are closed off by these huge circular boulders that they would put in front of the doorways, and miraculously were discovered when some guy was renovating his house and he crashed into one of these tunnel systems and went, wait, what's this? And all of a sudden discovered this 15 layer deep Darren Kuya or Cappadocia region as well. So yeah.
And then you got the catacombs in Paris as well. It
Right.
seems like that it's like was a well-known thing to have underground facilities, tunnels, something in case of a large global natural disaster.
You even find this in Peru. I mean, Peru is connected by a series of underground tunnels that go from Ollantaytambo to Cusco and other areas. And even in Kathmandu, where I grew up, Kathmandu is in a valley. It used to be a massive body of water until one of the gods, Chobar, he cut it with a massive sword and it drained out. But there are vast cave systems that go all around Kathmandu Valley and underneath Kathmandu Valley. And when the Ranas came in and took over the kingdom that was originally there, they fled or flooded these tunnels basically with all of their army and snuck into the city without anybody even knowing it. And so how did they know about these tunnel systems? There's tunnel systems all over Afghanistan and Pakistan as well. I mean,
I mean,
this
you got
is
them in the United States, for goodness sake. You got tunnels
right.
all over the United States. I mean, LA is full of tunnels. There's a
Even
whole
here,
underground system in LA.
even here in Portland, same thing with the Shanghai tunnels. They even go under the Willamette River. So
Vegas as well. So seems like some of these like the big major cities like all have like this huge underground complex underneath them.
yeah. When I lived in Washington, D.C., I lived in Vienna, Virginia. And my best friend and I, Scott, we'd go down into the storm drains and explore them for hours. I mean, you could just wander in these things forever. My parents ever knew I was down there, I would have been grounded forever. But we eventually came to this massive cistern where all these rainwater runoff systems flowed into, and you could look down that thing, and it looks like Zion in the Matrix. I mean, it just goes forever, and there's all these tunnel systems spilling water out into it forever, and then eventually it drains off into the Potomac. And you just got to wonder, when and who was building these massive infrastructures, because obviously, we've modernized them for today, but how old are they? What was the lay of the land to build that in the metropolitan DC area? Same with any city. It's like you never see the underground structure being built. You only see the buildings, right?
That's really interesting. It could be that it was some kind of plumbing, like a old school plumbing system, and
Right,
then it's not being used anymore, and now it's like tunnels because water is no longer running through them.
right.
That's interesting. And never really thought about it like that. Now, when you're in Egypt, because the big question always is, how was the pyramids built? What was it? Was it alien technology? Was it levitation? Was it frequency technology? And I'm sure that a lot of the guides in Egypt always get asked that question by people. How are these things built? What did
Endlessly.
they do? Like, there's no way that the bunch of slaves built these pyramids and that it was used for as a a grave site or whatever that they call it for burial. It's not a burial chamber, and many people will cite that no mummies were ever found in the Great Pyramid. They're found in Valley of the Kings. So, what do they say to that question? Because I think it's really interesting because we have this really weird idea of like technology, right? In our modern day, we think that technology only relates to, technological machinery, but remote viewing is also a technology. Out of body experiences or astral travel is also considered a technology.
Yep.
I mean, hell, even MK Ultra mind control is considered a technology. And
And the
this is
biggest
the
one, fire. Fire in the technology. So
fire
yeah.
is a technology. Like so many things, like spiritual abilities are like a technology. And this is the way that they play with words, right? Which also relates to ufology as well, which we're going to get into here a little bit later, like alien technology, right? Well, we all assume when people say alien technology that they mean physical craft, like a physical UFO or a UAP, because they don't really specify, right?
No.
But channeling an entity could also be considered a technology.
Well, and
What
this gets into what you were saying about astral projection. I mean, some of the ancient, ascended Tulku masters of Buddhist faith have been purported to be able to anthropomorphically shapeshift into other beings or creatures. And so this, in a sense, could possibly be a way of astral projecting your consciousness into something else. We're doing that with telepresence, with robotics right now. And so is it that far-fetched? No, not at all. I mean, we have a telepresence robot on the International Space Station. So somebody at Langley or somebody in, at NASA proper puts on the headgear and has full, autonomous mobility with that robot as if they were there. I mean, we do that now with all the VR, drone activity. I mean, you put on your VR goggle and you're flying that drone, just like you would be in the cockpit of an aircraft, but you're not experiencing any of the G forces that drone's going through or the whiplash, but your presence is there. You're guiding that from being physically there through camera and sensory perception. So yeah.
Well, I mean, Lynn Buchanan, which was a part of the Stargate project, which is so interesting now that Trump and
Brought
Elon
that
Musk
back
and all
up.
that, they're doing the Stargate AI thing, which is another way to convolute and obfuscate the actual Stargate program, which was for
Right.
remote viewers. Uh, Lynn Buchanan talked about this technique that's called perfect site integration, which was developed by Ingo Swann, and it's like the most advanced, one of the most advanced versions of remote viewing, where you can literally remote view an area or a target and then influence the environment around you. So it's almost like bilocation. You're like bilocating your physical body to another area.
Hey, I have a weird experience with something like this. I call it bleed over. And so I could be having a conversation with somebody like you or somebody in general where I'm physically present here in Portland, Oregon, but in my mind, I'm also at the exact same time walking through the streets of Kathmandu where I grew up. And I know exactly where I am. I'm walking by, the pot shop in Ossenthal where you buy, aluminum pots and pans. I know exactly what street corner I'm on. Oh, I just walked by, one of the buffaloes wandering down the street and the guy the guiding it. And it's almost as real, which is why I call it bleed over, as physically being here and having a conversation with you. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does present itself. And I often get what I would say my deja vu moment where I start getting chicken skin on my arms. I start getting the when you get cold, you get chicken skin basically. I get this very sharp, it's almost like fingernail polish or ozone smell and taste metallic in my mouth. And then I get a full body rush. And at that moment, it's like, oh, I've been here before, or I know something's going to happen almost instantly. And so I've always called this like my deja vu moment because it's very physical, but it also has this, subliminal aspect to it. So that's interesting that Ego Swan had come up with this format. So going back to your question about Egypt, though, and how the pyramids are built, if you're actually standing there, you realize that none of the blocks in the pyramid are the same size. They're not perfect. There's gaps and spaces between them. And a lot of this, there's been several earthquakes in the area. So a lot of it has been because, the earthquakes have kind of rumbled part of it apart, but they're not perfect and they don't fit together perfectly. And I think this is intentionally designed similar to Roman soldiers walking across a bridge. If you all walk in lockstep, that bridge is going to collapse underneath you because you're creating an amplified harmonic resonance. It's just going to tear the bridge apart. But if you're walking out of step or out of sync with each other, you're not creating that ripple effect. And I think a lot of these ancient structures were built similarly, so they're not completely uniform in every way, shape, or form. That way, if there are earthquakes, they can survive them because that energy is being dissipated throughout smaller shapes or different size shapes within it versus hitting each of the same block that's exactly the same shape over and over and over again, which would create this amplified ripple effect. And you see this in Peru. Not a single one of the blocks, except possibly if you're in Cusco with the sacred wall, not the Inca Rocco wall, but the wall of the Coricancha. All of those blocks are uniformly the same size. But if you look at everything else around Peru, oh my God, everything is nothing matches. And part of this is because it's such an earthquake prone zone that mismatch of shape would allow that energy to transfer through the objects without really affecting it. And so this is a technology in its own. How did the ancients even know that? How did they realize how to build their structures that way so that they could be earthquake resistant or earthquake proofed?
So they're slightly off in order for it, because if it was built 100% perfectly, it would probably collapse and be destroyed by some kind of natural disaster. So it's off in some places. They give it that wiggle room to where it'll stay standing.
Correct.
Wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a knowledge that just doesn't come out of hunter and gatherers sitting down to one day, around the fire. We're going to build the pyramids. No, I mean this takes mathematics and planning and structural design from somewhere. I mean, you'd have to discover this technique somewhere. How would you do it? Building models? Well, good possibility, but hands-on training within the field obviously is the way to do it. So.
Yeah, I think this version of like technology is like it's so weird because we use like double speak in a lot of the buzzwords that we use in the community. Like they play with words a lot. Like crash retrieval. Well, it doesn't matter when that supposed crash happened. It could have been last week, last year, or 100 years ago. It would still be considered a crash retrieval, right? And another term like alien, if you go into another country that you're not a citizen of, you're considered an alien.
Right.
And when you break down the term extraterrestrial, it just means extra land, doesn't mean space aliens. So we really have the community like screwed up in all kinds of ways. You could look at it like
I've never thought of extraterrestrial like that, but you're spot on. That's really interesting.
I mean, if you look at it like the alien invasion happened from 2020 to 2024, right? And Trump is coming in and stop them by deporting them back to extra land, extraterrestrials back to their extra land,
Wow.
aliens. He's defeated the aliens, right?
Wow. I've never really put that together. That's interesting because even the English language itself is not perfect, and I'm always asked the question, why do you think spells are always in English? And I'm like, because English is the dominant language, and so if you can cast a spell in English upon the masses, they're all going to understand that spell, and that spell can come visually, it can come through audible or wordsmithing. I mean, how many words for the word two do we have? Two, 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 and two, right? Where, and where, So it's not a perfect language, but it's interesting because it was designed as a language to control the masses. And so English in itself is a spell. Everything is spelling. And it's interesting that you talk about aliens in that sense because especially in some of the older stories that I've been, doing my research into, like around the Dropa stones and Dropa people, we're told that the Dropa stones had an alien language on it. Well, was it an alien language or was it a foreign language that was unrecognizable, which therefore would be an alien language? And when you start, digging into the research, you realize that the latter is the truth. It's an unrecognizable language of the region. Well, that's not necessarily extraterrestrial language or a language from the skies. It could be something that's regional that the scholar researching the information on it
had no idea what it was.
Had no idea what it was, but the fact that he could translate it over 20 years without a alien cipher means that it would have to be a regional language. So yeah, there's a lot around that.
Well, it's masterful speaking, right? It's a Freemasonic technology where you say two things at once and the listener creates the perception for them of what they're saying. But really they're saying and meaning something completely different.
And this is the same with symbology. Yeah.
Yeah. And it ties in with also revelation or revelation of the method, like predictive programming, also with terms like national security threat that everyone loves to throw around in the community. It's not a threat because we don't know what they are or that they're invading our airspace. It's a threat because if other countries figure out the technology, then we're up shit's creek, right? That's the excuse that the government always uses. Oh, well, if we don't do it, someone else is going to do it. That's the whole reason why anything ever gets done, even when it's not in our best interest to do it. That's the exact same excuse that Elon Musk and others are using to build this Stargate super ultra mega AI, right?
Nobody else can have the technology but these five companies that we happen to own, because when AI was first perceived, obviously the notion that came with it was whatever nation controls this controls the world. So if we can shut down all these independent open source, active AI, developers in a sense, then we control all of that. We control all the programming. And even if it's open source, you better believe there's a backdoor built into that. I'm sorry, there just is.
That's right, and I mean that's proven in the octopus, Danny Casolaro octopus
Mm,
story. That's what they were doing with the Promise software back in the '80s. Like
mm.
they created this database of this criminal database and stuff for like tracking and everything, and then they sold it to other countries, and then they put a backdoor into that technology, so then they could effectively spy on every single country that bought the technology.
Bingo.
And that's the
And
justification.
monetize it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the other half of it, is monetization. And so, yeah.
It's always, if we don't do it, China's going to do it, Russia's going to do it, you know, and you might as well just, tack on the social credit score and the digital ID while you're at it if you want to be like China. And also, that's the exact excuse that they used for the Stargate remote viewing unit at Fort Meade, too, was because they didn't want Russia getting the upper hand because they found out that the Soviets were using
Deep into
psychic
it. Deep into it. Yeah.
to collect intelligence data on the US, right? It's the same thing. It's the same shit. But now we have to develop this ultra mega super AI mega computer before China does.
Frightening. Why can't we? I mean, we're at a point, it's 2025. Are we really still living, 100 years in the past? I mean, we have the infrastructure, we have the finances, we have the technology to solve a lot of the problems that this planet is having, but we choose not to. And it's not a collective choice. Obviously, there's people at the top of those pyramids making those decisions. uh, WEF groups like this that just they want us to all be gone, because then they have access to more of the resources, versus finding a way that we can actually solve a lot of these problems and share the resources and come out of this much stronger and much better as a global population. Nothing to do with globalism or globalists, but a global population that seems to get along a lot better. We have global systems. Music is a global system. Bands tour all over the world and are popular everywhere. The internet is a global system. I'm having a communication with you several thousand, 1,000 miles away from you or more, and we're able to talk this way. Well, in the past, we weren't able to do this. You had to send a letter, and that letter would take 2 to 3 to 4 weeks to get to somebody, and then you've got to craft a nifty reply and send it back. And what would take a second and a half between two emails literally is a 2 month process. And so we're in a play. I mean, even transportation is a global system. I can get on a plane here in Portland and end up in South Africa, or end up in Reykjavik, in Iceland, or end up anywhere in the world that I want, as long as I have the money and the ability to go there. Same with train systems, same with cars. And so we have all these global systems already in play. The question is, why can't we utilize them for the best result for all of us, so that we're not all sitting in a struggle trying to create the systems that we have. Yeah. Like, I think Jay Widener said it, our cell phone, how many people go into making this thing? There's 10,000 people globally that make one cell phone, because of all the parts, the mining, everything that goes into the operation of making your cell phone. And so this is a global operation of sorts. We should be at a better place in time, where we're not constantly having to get into war. We're not constantly having to cause strife and displacement for other nationalities, including ourselves. We could kick the ball of poverty down the hill and survive all of that. We have it. I mean, what do these billionaires need all their money for? They can't take it with them. They can reinvest it into infrastructures that work, but they don't. They choose not to, and it's just they're looking for the best return on their bottom dollar, and it's mind-boggling. I mean, what could you do with $280 billion? I mean,
Well, I don't even think it's so much about money, it's about control. And
Right.
that's why war-torn countries still exist. That's why poverty still exists, because there's money to be made off of those people. And if everything was, happy and fairy tales and everywhere was the same, then
That'd be
all
boring.
those other people can, well, not even that. It's that those other countries and those other people could then become independent.
Right.
They
And
don't
that
have to be a
that
part of anything.
right.
They could rise up through the ranks, right? So they have to keep people down on the totem pole, and the way that they do that is through fear and through propaganda and through all the things that they do. And I think that they think that that structure is going to last forever, and I don't think that it can, because I think that at some point people are going to be backed so far into a corner. I think it's a travesty that war torn countries still exist
Yeah.
in
That's
this day. It's wild.
yeah. It's like we got two steps forward and then we pulled the rug out from them. We were sawing on the branch that we're standing on. It's like, what? Why? We were in such a good place, and then everything just collapsed again because I miss George Carlin. I love his jokes. I won't repeat him here, but he's like, "What? They've got bigger members. Bomb them!" uh,
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's wild to think that we live in the United States and like there's other countries that are existing right now that are just in the worst possible shape ever. What is what is Mexico like? Because you've been to Mexico, and I was just thinking about this yesterday, Hans. I was like, why do we not get any information from Mexico? Why do we not hear about the Mexican military? Why do we not hear about anything about the Mexican government? I have never heard one thing in my life about the Mexican military.
all you hear is about the cartels. Yeah, that's very interesting that you say that. It's like cartel, cartel, cartel. Oh, there's this new person in power. We know nothing about her. Okay, cartel, cartel. Or, coyotes running the border or this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, I've been to Mexico twice now. I went a couple years ago with my girlfriend. We went to Puerto Vallarta and then drove north to Sayulita. And then north of that to this little tiny hole in the wall fishing village called Playa Platanitos. It's super beautiful. There's an amazing yoga shala there, and these $1 million Airbnbs that are hidden from the main road. And you got to wonder who owns these, because this is all, MS-13 and some of the other gang territories up there. And you see the signs all over the road, don't stop for anybody, MS-13, this, that, and the other thing. And so it's very obvious that the government's trying to do something about it. But here you are in this little tiny fishing village, there's 5 restaurants and a little cantina and then a little, local pasal or shop where you can buy some medical supplies and maybe some, going bad milk or orange juice or something. But that's it. There's nothing else there. And you're 3 hours from Puerto Vallarta in the middle of nowhere. But it was so beautiful there. It was so amazing to wake up in the morning and just hear the ocean come in. And I got sicker than a dog. I've grown up in Asia. I've been sick. Let me tell you, I've had dysentery, giardia, food poisoning, you name it. I was so sick from whatever we ate. It was unbelievable. And what saved me was we bought some unpasteurized milk at the organic store in Puerto Vallarta and then made that into kefir. And the kefir totally settled my stomach. I was able to, rehydrate myself, and it was amazing. And I thoroughly enjoyed that experience. But there's not a lot of ancient sites in that area. And so I went down there at the end of March with Grandmaster Timothy Hogan and the Templar Tours. We did a quick 5-day tour of around Cancun down south to Tulum, Nakmal in the middle of the jungle, which was one of the most amazing sights I've seen. Down to Chichen Itza to see some of the Chichen Itza and some of the cenotes. And just going there opened my mind to so much more. I've always been fascinated by the Olmec culture. I've always been fascinated by the Aztec and the Mayan cultures, but primarily the Olmec cultures. And so seeing the Mayan culture firsthand was even more mind blowing, because here you have these pyramidal structures. They're built next to, around, and over these ancient cenotes. So here you have the underground water structures again that stretch, throughout ley lines and underneath the ground as well. And seeing something like Nakmal in the middle of the jungle, it's like you can see how the jungle has grown over the ancient Mayan road, because it's very obvious that there was, I don't want to say paved, but it's a bordered cobblestone road that stretches for miles and miles and miles and connects all these sites, but the jungle has literally grown over it. You get to see some of the ancient ball courts. The one at Chichen Itza is interesting because it's huge. The hoops are 15, 20 feet in the air, and all the walls are completely straight. But at Nakmal, there are two courts there, and they have angular sloping walls with the rings that they would shoulder the balls through, because you couldn't use your hands or your feet, so it was like all knee work, chest work, shoulder work. Seems like a next to impossible game. I would love to see how they were playing it, and why it hasn't become a sport today. But yeah, no, seeing some of these ancient sites there really blew my mind. Tulum was amazing. There were just too many tourists there. I mean, I want to say there were 4,000 tourists there when we were there. And so you're on a quick tour group. They usher you through those sites so quickly, and you don't really have time to stop and explore and actually see some of the areas like you would at a site like Karnak, where you're given 4 or 5 hours to wander around Karnak. You're still only going to see like a small portion of it, but you get to experience more of it. The other site that really blew my mind was Chichen Itza, because it's huge and they only show you a very small portion of it. There's so much of it that stretches into the jungles. There's a sacred cenote there. If you go past where the observatory is, which is so far the only rounded building that they found there, there's another temple structure buried in the jungle. And Tim, we left our group, and Tim took us over there because this is where there's evidence of Templar. The Templars coming in the 1200s. There's evidence all over the Mayan culture that they came long before Cristobal de Colon and his band of merry pirates who supposedly discovered the Americas. Christopher Columbus, it's not his name, but anyway, there's evidence that the Templars had come over long before that, but there's also evidence of other cultures. And so this one temple that we were shown, on all 4 corners of the temple are elephant reliefs. Okay, elephants. Well, there's no elephants in South, Central, or North America. There were mammoths, but how long ago was that, right? And so why are there elephant reliefs on the side of these buildings? And then the temple behind it, over the front lintel of it, is a man or a character, man, woman, mostly a character, sitting in lotus position. So here you have a Buddhist artifact in the middle of the Mayan culture. And so this beggars the question, if the Mayans are, an offshoot of what we would call the time of Atlantis. I don't call it a place, I call it a time. And as we know from Plato's accounts, it was a globalized civilization. There wasn't just one city or one island that sunk. There were 5 capitals, and they were not just in the Atlantic Ocean. There was Poseidia and all these other things. Dark Journalist gets into this a lot in some of his hot zone stuff, as well as where some of these cities might have been located. But here you have the Mayan culture, which was a huge offshoot of Poseidia. And so if this was a globalized culture, you would have been sharing, like we do today, the fruits of globalization, knowledge, livestock, different food groups. You go to Peru, they have 25, 30 different types of corn, 25, 30 different types of potato. Depending on what elevation you live in, this was how they would trade. And you would come to them and they would say, well, how high above sea level are you? Oh, well, you need this type of corn, or, oh, you need this type of potato, or this type of quinoa that will grow very well in your environment. And so they would grow these things at different trophic levels as a means of trade. And so I feel that the Olmecs, there's a big possibility that the Olmecs were an offshoot of the Kham culture of South Asia. We find Kham evidence in Iran, all the way through Asia, all the way through Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, into Tibet, into Cambodia, into Thailand, all the way down into Indonesia. This could be an offshoot of the Kem, or Cometian culture of ancient Egypt, which is Egypt. Interesting because most of what we've learned of Egypt comes from the Greeks. After the Greeks conquered Egypt in the 300 BC era, I mean, pretty much the history that we're taught of Egypt is their history of Egypt. And Egypt is even a misconstrued name. It comes from the word Hetka Ptah, which was written on a stele in the city of Memphis. Memphis is a Greek name, so it was Men Nephir, which meant the harmony of fertility. because of where it's located. It's Cairo. It's right there at the Nile Delta. So this is the bread basket of fertility right there for northern Egypt. And the Greeks were taken to this temple structure, and on the stele, they were told it said Het Ka Ptah. Well, Het Ka Ptah means the place where this body double or physical body of Ptah, the creator, manifests. So Ka is your physical double. If you're in a state of astral projection or lucid dreaming and you find yourself on the ceiling of your living room while you're passed out on the couch, you're physically, energetically in that form on the ceiling in the living room, but you're also physically and energetically laying on the couch and you're looking down on yourself on the couch. Well, that's your Ka. It's your body double in a sense, where you floating around the ceiling would be your Ba. And so the Greeks heard het koptos, and this is where we get the word Coptic from. Well, Coptic just means ka ptah all over again. So it's the physical body of the creator. And it's interesting because the Coptics, these, were the Christians before Christ. Well, Christ is another word that comes from the Greeks. Obviously, so do a lot of our biblical studies. Coptic, or Christ comes from the word Christos, which means anointed. So the Coptic Christians were the anointed followers of the physical body of the Creator. It had nothing to do with this Yeshua character at all. It predates him by 1,000 years. And so, again, all of our history is kind of misconstrued. It all ends up in these different aspects. But from Het Ka Ptah or Het Koptos, the Greeks changed that to Egyptos, which then became Egypt. And so instead of just being this temple for Ptah, they saw it as the entirety of the land. And when they conquered the land, it was a lot smaller than it had previously been. But the Commission Empire stretched all the way from the Atlantic across pretty much to the Pacific, or to the Pacific, to the Red Sea, through Ethiopia, Sudan, and Mali, and all these areas, all the way up to Morocco, across Libya, and all the way pretty much into the Levant. This was all the ancient Commission lands. And it's interesting that the Commission lands also sound a lot like the Phoenician lands. So you have a transliteration aspect going there. And the Phoenicians called that whole Fertile Crescent around the Mediterranean, they called this area Cydonia. And this is really interesting because this is what we named the area on Mars where you find all of the pyramids, the D&M pyramid, the five-sided pyramid, and the face on Mars. Well, what do we find in Cydonia on Earth? Well, we find all the pyramids of Giza and the Sphinx. But this is what that area was called, was Cydonia. And it's interesting because the word Cairo comes from Al-Khayr, which means basically the city of war or the city of Mars. And so why is Cairo named after Mars? And so there's an interesting aspect there. but a lot of our history comes out of the Greeks. Anyway, yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, when you get into the Vermanas and the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about that. I guess it's kind of supposed that they went to Mars, like a group of individuals went to Mars, and then they for to escape a great cataclysm, and then they came back from Mars, and then they saw that the people of Earth had survived this cataclysm.
This is part of the Mahabharata, and which is the 18-day war. Once they had returned, basically, that was the Great War that happened. But it's also found in the Vedas, in the Prana Vedas. Jay Widener talks a lot about this as well. They went to a place. There's two names to it, but the first name of it is called Mahar, and they were escaping the outburst from the sun. Well, Mahar in the Vedas is described as the fourth density from the sun. Well, that's Mars. If we're talking about planets, it's a density. And so they ended up going there, stayed there for several millennia. Their skin color changed to this bluish white, an alchemical blue or Smurf blue if you're eating too much colloidal silver. They grew in height. They had more of an auburn hair. Their eye color changed because of the lighting, on this ancient planet. Was there life on this planet back then? Well, that's interesting because, we're now finding water on Mars. Well, ever since we started going to Mars, we found water. If you read the Viking reports from 1975, they found not only water, but the possibility that there was bacteria reaction in one of their tests. So not only did they find water, but they found life. And as Carl Sagan always said, if we find 1 ounce of bacteria outside of, Earth's magnetosphere, then the entire universe is teeming with life, which of course it is. I mean, we're foolish to think that we're the only life out there. Look at how many billions of species exist on this planet alone, not just humans. I mean, we've got things we're even discovering that are microscopic, and we
You're freezing up, Hans.
observe any of it. Oh, it just froze up again.
Freezing up.
They don't like what we're talking about.
Gremlins got us. I mean, where are they though? Right? If the universe is so teeming with life, and this is
Where-
out of respect, right? It's out of. I'm asking the question out of respect. Where are they? Like, why
That's a
can't we
good
see
question.
them?
Would we have the ability to find? Well, I mean, our eyesight is very limited. We only can see about 2 DPI, which is less than our HD, high definition LED monitors are projecting at us. We don't have the rods and the cones to see inc- ability to look at a planetary system or a star and figure out what its composition is. But how that's accurate, how much space debris and dust and rocks and comets and asteroids and asteroid belts between us, the Oort cloud, even between us and seeing the light coming off of a planet in another solar system. Oh, this planet is all water. How do we know that? It's the same question I always ask when NASA puts out these wonderful photos that show the supposed Milky Way galaxy, and it says you are here. Well, really? Where's camera? Who's observing that we're there? We don't have any idea where we are in our own galaxy or our own universe because we cannot triangulate ourselves. And so
Try and
but where are they?
can you just exit out real quick and then come back into the studio, and maybe that'll fix up some of this glitching problem because you're
Yeah, let me do
glitching
that.
really bad. Okay.
I might try and okay.
I'm gonna kick him from the studio really quickly because he was breaking up really bad there. Scotty Boy says, I can see auroras, but today its levels gray, not so much colors. Yeah, I've seen some auroras around people as well. I've seen some red ones and I've seen some purple ones. I've seen a purple one radiating off of some people at a conference once. Not like a UFO conference or anything, but it was like a lecture. And I seen it like this purple aurora just wash over the entire group of people. I think I've seen a yellow one time as well. I haven't seen them for a really long time though. Walter, what's up, brother? Good to see you, my friend. Thanks for jumping in. You're back. Can you hear me?
Hopefully this works a little better. I turned the definition on my camera down. Thank you, Walter. Excellent topics. Totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, so we were in the middle of discussing, where are they? You broke up really bad. So if you want to go back on that, and because I
Well, I
think
was
you
saying
were
it's kind of a
explaining that
hypothetical question.
we only see,
How 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 would we know? Because we only see about 200 DPI. That's all the rods and cones in our eyes allow us to see. We're using these high definition TVs and LED screens on all of our devices that projected us at 1200 DPI. We can't even see that. So it looks nice and crisp, but our eyes can only see so much. And we have all this great technology now, like the the Webb telescope and Hubble, and we're able to see into the vastness of the universe. But what actually are we looking at, and what are we looking for? I mean, what would be the signature of a Type 1 or a Type 2 or a Type 3 civilization when we're not even there ourselves? How would we know what we're looking at or what we're looking for? When we start looking at other planets around other suns, we have this way of using refraction of light to say, oh, the atmosphere is made up of diamond, or it's made up of pure water, or there's hydrogen and there's other compounds here, just from the red, green, and blue flicker that comes to us across the vastness of interstellar space. Well, how much space debris is in between us? Is space fluidic? How much dark matter is causing a refraction or a displacement of what we're looking at? How much dust is out there? How many asteroid belt, the Oort cloud? I mean, when we see projections of what the Oort cloud looks around our sun, how are we even able to see through it? It's like this big white bubble around our sun that's way out past Pluto, and is hundreds of thousands of billions of miles thick. And so it's like, how do we actually see what we're seeing through all of that and accurately be able to say, oh, this is a water bearing planet around XYZ sun out there that's 100 light years away? How do we even know that? We have no way of knowing that. It's the same as when NASA and other scientific groups put out the picture of our galaxy, which we don't even see. We don't even know if we're in one. And there's that arrow that points to the outer ring of one of the arms, and it says, "You are here." Well, it beggars the question, where's camera? We can't even triangulate where we are in our own existence. So how do we know what we're looking for outside of our own existence? How do we know what the signatures of life on another planet would even look like?
Well, I guess we would be thinking that they're similar to ours. I just think that it's interesting that, there's really no data. Like if you were to go to court and try and prove that that extraterrestrials exist, you couldn't.
No.
You couldn't do it. Like really all that we have is like eyewitness testimony, and that's not me saying that these people didn't see something, right? But of course there's a phenomenon, there's something going on, but to say that it's extraterrestrial, you can't prove it. There's no data to back that these are entities or some kind of physical being coming here from space or from another planet. Now, if they do exist and physical life as we know it exists on other planets, I actually like the idea that they are able to bilocate into this reality onto our planet, right? So they don't actually, again, if they exist, they actually don't physically leave where they are. They bilocate here in some kind of holographic technology, and then we get a little bit of snippet of that. That's why they're able to disappear and reappear and do whatever it is that they want, because they're not really physically here. It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier with Lynn Buchanan and this perfect site integration,
Right.
where you can remote view an area and like basically replicate your body and interact with the environment while you're there. You can change things while you're in this remote viewing state. So the even more advanced version of that would be able to bilocate an entire a craft if you wanted to, or turn your body into a craft. Like a lot of people think that a lot of these crafts are physical entities. That's what Kenneth Arnold later on turned his theory and hypothesis into, was that the crafts were living entities, that they were like plasma type jellyfish craft, and they were like a living life form. But I think
That's
that it makes
interesting.
more sense to me that if they exist, they're not traveling across space-time. They're just able to bilocate a version of what they are temporarily to our planet.
Interesting you say that, because in my thesis study in college, I studied Buddhist cultural mysticism, ancient art, and architecture. And I primarily was focused around Bhutan, because in Bhutan, they have a very rare sect of Buddhism called Nyingma Buddhism. This is where we get all the stories of levitation, levitating monks, astral projection, ascended Tulku masters, the dimensional portals of Mount Meru connected to Sirius by a rainbow bridge. I mean, this all comes out of this very specific sect of Buddhism. And when you start looking into the stories of astral projection, they're talking literally about this bilocational aspect. In the blink of an eye, they can cross the dimensions of time to other realms, planets, suns, galaxies, so universes in a sense. And so, well, what is that? Is it your physical consciousness or your energy form? Yes. Is there a possibility of trapping that around more of a nuts and bolts type of vehicle? Yes. And in these ancient Buddhist stories that go back beyond 100 BC, they talk about this. They talk about physical entities coming here in flying palaces, 7 layered palaces, accompanied by the sounds of hundreds of thousands of musical instruments traveling from Sirius to Earth in the blink of an eye. And arriving here, and they hear this cacophony of sound that they allot to hundreds of thousands of musical instruments being played without players. Well, what are they talking about here? They're talking about an entity that has arrived in some sort of physical craft from somewhere else, another realm, another dimension, another planet. We don't really know outside of these stories. But why are these stories so prolific in Buddhism, or specific areas of Buddhism, where it isn't in others? I mean, you can find similar aspects in almost every religion. At some point the gods have come to the earth, but here, in some of these stories, we're actually being told about a physical presence and a physical vehicle that has brought them here, which just is mind-boggling, because we don't get into that in a lot of Buddhist practice. They just talk philosophy and poetry. They don't talk about some of these other interesting elements, which is what I got into studying. And I'll do my shameless plug. A lot of that can be found in my book, Dropa, Legends and Lore. And so I got into a lot of my thesis study before I started getting into learning about the Dropa and Dropa nomadic people of South Asia and the Dropa stones. That was 1998 to basically 2018. I didn't study any of this stuff. I got deep into graphic design and multimedia, and eventually these subjects started coming back around, and I was challenged to start diving into some of these esoteric topics, and I did. Especially after going to Egypt in 2018, where while on the Nile cruise with Brian Forrester and his wife, and there were about 10 of us. We were on the roof of the Nile cruise in the middle of nowhere. There's no city lights. It's starting to get to dusk. We're having a beer and chatting Brian and Ariane up, and all of a sudden this orb whips by, and it's like a bright white light, but has orange and blue intermixed with it. This color of magic, as we call it. It's like a rainbow of colors, but mixed in with this bright, intense light. And following it are these two F-15s. And then shortly after that, a second one comes along and just bobs along behind them, as if to say, hi, here we are. And I found it interesting because in Portland, Oregon, where I live, around that exact same time, it was April of 2018, there was an orb that supposedly whipped by PDX Airport, which is where they now have all the F-35s. They moved them all up from Ashland and from Klamath Falls, Southern Oregon, to Portland. And they scrambled that jet so quickly and chased this thing up towards Seattle and caught up with whatever they were chasing in approximately, under a minute or some ridiculous time frame like this. And my first thought was, okay, they're training our pilots to open up their envelope to G-forces. Because whatever's piloting these crafts, whether it be an entity, whether it be our own drone technology, somebody using, some sort of telepresence, as we were talking earlier, to control these devices, they're not subject to the G-forces like the pilots are. But this is a good way of training our pilots to open up their envelope to be more superior pilots when they get into G-force environments. And I've always wondered, are a lot of these drones for training purposes? What is the rationale behind them? People are like, oh, I'm seeing drones all over Portland. Well, we have what I call them quadrant drones. And so they'll come up 205 and they'll cut down 84, and then they'll cut down I-5, and then they'll cut back over behind Mount Tabor. And then they do this circular pattern. And there's 2 or 3 of these that fly over Portland at all periods of time. But there's other drones that people have started, noticing as lights that will just appear somewhere and then blip out and appear somewhere else, and blip out and appear somewhere else and blip out. And so it's staggering the question, what is all this drone technology? Is it our military technology? Is it runaway AI? Is it extraterrestrial? I mean, I'm on I'm always on the conservative path of it's probably our own technology, and a lot of it is being used as a training mechanism, as a form of fear or or as we were saying, I think in the green room, threat in a sense. If we can't create this fear and this threat, we can't fund these projects. When Lou Elizondo and Grosh came out and they had their Senate hearing, and Grosh was like, "Oh, I know somebody that knows somebody that maybe had seen some of this stuff, but I can't talk about it. We can talk about it in private or in a skiff."
Gotta get in the
Well,
skiff, bro. Get in that skiff with me.
that skiff better have some life rafts, But I mean, you gotta think about that right there, because almost immediately they dumped about $2 billion into Space Force because of the whole threat narrative that came out of that. And so again, going back to dark journalists, always give him credit for this. He talked a little bit about the aspect that they want to control the marketing narrative around a lot of these new narratives, because they see that this is a field where people are making a lot of money telling these stories over the course of time. And so if they can control that marketing narrative, they can make that money. And we're kind of seeing that unfold. And so it really beggars the question, what are we being told? Why are we being told it? Is it misinformation? Is it misdirection? Is it intentional? A lot of it could be, because you look at something like Werner von Braun told his secretary before he died, we'd go through all these different phases, the terrorist nation, environmental problems, asteroids, and the last card would be the UFO card. And it basically would be there to control the narrative or control all of us. And we're kind of seeing hodgepodge of environmental effects, asteroids, and the UFO narrative all coming together in one bucket. And so it's like, pick your villain. You still have two others that are sitting there in that bucket. So
They do the asteroid thing every single year. They just did it over Christmas as well.
yeah,
Like a giant asteroid's headed for Earth.
and it's going to be between the moon and the Earth. Well, you do realize that you could fit every single planet in our solar system between Earth and the moon. I don't think people realize that. That's how far the moon is. And that's how big the planets in our solar system are.
Well, that's what they tell you, Hans. That's what they tell you, but we don't really know, do we?
We don't. And the moon seems like it's getting bigger and bigger in the night sky. So either the pollution's getting worse or it's getting closer.
Hey, I did go out and see the moon the other day, and I was like, wow, that is really big. It looked bigger than what I ever remember it being.
Yeah.
I came inside, I told my girlfriend, I was like, come out here and see the moon. Big moon. And I think it was like a full moon for like an extended amount of time.
A little bit. Yeah, it seemed like it. And they called it wasn't a red moon or a blood moon. There was another name for it.
Super moon.
Yeah, something like that. Which is interesting. I mean, the moon cycles are incredibly fascinating. I believe it was the Mayans that had a 13-month calendar, and it was all based on moon cycles, where we kind of have a weird debauched 12-month cycle based on 360 days, but obviously there's 365. So it fluctuates, which is why we have a leap year every 7 years or whatnot, because they have to adjust for this weird calendrical system. But the ancients knew it, and they saw it as moon cycles. And so it's interesting that our wave patterns all flow around moon cycles. Women's menstrual systems all flow around moon cycles. So, but what is the moon? What truly is it?
Yeah, and that gets into esoteric things as well. Like in Christianity, Gabriel's a part of the moon. It's a section of the moon. Gabriel's the one that came to Mary and Joseph. Taught them the ways of sexual intercourse by having a divine child. It's like it gets super esoteric. Scotty Boy says here, what do you think about Trump releasing the JFK stuff? Right. I mean, I think that it's going to happen. I mean, he's already signed it. It's going to be the JFK files, RFK files, and Martin Luther King Jr. files. I think you should do the 9/11 files too. If you really want some juicy stuff and get everybody up in a roar, release the 9/11 files.
Concern is about 90% of it's going to be blacked out.
That's what people are saying. I don't know. Supposedly it has to go through 14 different agencies. Don't quote me on that, but a lot of different agencies it has to go through before it can be released. And some of it probably is going to be redacted, which I don't know how you can say something's been released when there's redactions to it. That doesn't seem like a releasing of files to me. That's not what I think of a releasing of files to be whenever it's redacted files. When you release something, you think that you get to see all of it. That's at least what I think. I don't know if that's the way that they look at it. They probably don't look at it that way, but yeah, some of the MK Ultra files were also redacted as well for like funding and where they got a lot of their funding from to do the operation.
But and it also creates more of the conspiracy around, well, what are they redacting? And it just it's that energy buzz, energy in, energy out, right? And so if you're putting energy into false or realistic redaction, then what are you redacting? What are you hiding from us? And that just causes more of a stir and more of an interest. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to happen, but how much of it we're actually going to get to see, don't know. I hope all of it. And I'm actually really interested about the Martin Luther King Jr. files and the RFK files because we talk about RFK a lot in A Clockwork Shining and Sirhan. So
The police officer that was standing behind him that conveniently fled to Cambodia or whatever and lived out his life there. You got to remember RFK was shot in the back, but Sirhan was standing in front of him, and there were 13 shots fired, and he had an 8-round gun. So you got to magic bullets. They come out of nowhere. Yes. And then conveniently, he's reading.
Well, he wasn't reading Catcher in the that was the psychic driving
Oh,
aspect with Sirhan. Mark David Chapman
that's
was
right.
reading Catcher in the Rye, and John Hinckley.
John Hinckley.
John
That's
Hinckley
right.
Jr., which John Hinckley Jr. is out of prison.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. You'd be somebody worth interviewing.
I might try and get him on. Never know. Let's find out the truth, bro.
Right. Right.
What happened? Let's hear it from the horse's mouth. Right. But what do you think about this AI stuff? Because I think that the AI is kind of going to be a big threat in the future. I don't really like the direction that AI is heading with all of the fake AI videos and the fake AI pictures. It's just convoluting and making the truth even harder to actually sniff out. And
I had, strangely, I had an AI interview for a potential contract I was supposed to be working on, and I felt really awkward about that because it tapped out halfway through the interview, and I'm just like, is this even a real person I'm talking to? I mean, it was very bizarre, and I'm seeing the creep into so many different industries with AI. I call it machine learning because there is no intelligence there. It's just learning and learning and learning and computating every single outcome. And this is I do a lecture series on AI in the movies. And ever since Metropolis, we've had 3 different forms of AI in the movies, but all of them are stuck within their own programming, which I find very fascinating. So the first AI that rolls out in the movies in Metropolis is in Metropolis, and it's this female AI that was created as a sex bot. So the first AI ever that we ever see is a sex bot.
woo, yeah, everybody getting laid.
Then you have Hal, right? So Hal is self-aware and wants to murder everybody for the greater good of his programming. So now you have the malintent AI. And then you have the helper AIs, which are C3PO and R2D2 in Star Wars. And this cycle repeats through almost every movie that we see. It's either a sex bot, like in the movie AI, Jude Law's character. He's the gigolo, right? So there you have your sex bot. Or in Blade Runner, you've got what's her name's character, the main female lead in there. She's also a sex bot or a pleasure bot. And this just repeats over and over. So you've got the malintent, the benefactor, and the sex bot. And this is the continuation of how we're being sold AI. But for some reason, everybody thinks that AI is going to take over the world and kill us all, and it's just going to become, self-aware and so on and so forth. Well, it's stuck within its own programming. It can never break that, and that I've always found very interesting. Asimov talks about with the 3 laws, right? And so those are programmed into just about anything that, could possibly have any sort of sentient aspect. Without the internet, AI would never exist. It could never control any of our lives. It could never be what it is right now. But because we have the internet, it has an unlimited source of information that it can pile through in, megaseconds or not, and just keep accumulating more and more and more information. And so you're basically filling buckets of sand. It might do one pass of the internet and it learns, but if it's doing 150 million passes of the internet, then it's learned 150 million grains of sand, and now you have a pile. And so it can always go back to that pile and just pull from those resources. But you start looking at, we're going to have self-driving cars that can take you anywhere that they want. There's no way that this is going to happen because there's too many unpredictable elements on the road for it to happen. All of a sudden there's a new pothole. Well, the new pothole wasn't picked up by the AI on the first pass during the training run. It's gonna hit the pothole. Oh shit, a cow just walked across in front of us. Oh no, there's just so many variables that autonomous driving at the level that they want it to be at could not possibly happen. I mean,
I just seen a video. So funny. This automatic driving car. Did you see this video where this guy got an automatic driving car pickup from Uber, and something glitched out on it, and it just keeps driving in circles in a parking lot?
I have not seen this.
It was just driving in circles in a parking lot. So he tried to call Uber and was like, "Something's wrong with my car." And then the lady's like, "Well, we can't turn it off here." Like he was stuck in a parking lot with the car going in circles.
Oh, that's frightening. So many. It just it brings up there's too many variables for things to go wrong. And my cousin has a Tesla, and I got in the car with him, and he put it on self-drive and to have a conversation with me. And I'm like, dude, watch the road. Oh, the car will do that. I'm like, no, watch the road. Because again, I don't trust the technology, especially, like we were talking social credit score earlier. I mean, they can turn your car off in a heartbeat, or they could.
Well, then who's responsible for that? Like, who holds the liability if an accident happens?
You do as the owner.
Whack.
Pass
Whack.
the
But
buck.
the car was in autopilot, bro. It was driving itself.
You're the one that put it in autopilot.
I think that the manufacturer should be responsible.
Oh, I agree. But you're the one that pressed autopilot, so that's your responsibility. I mean, it's like a lot of this hasn't been thoroughly thought out. And so it's interesting that we were talking about now, this Project Stargate. It's so interesting that they would bring this title back up because this was such a remote viewing title back in the day, and now they're using it for AI, which AI is a technology that in a sense has the ability to remote view or predictive program things. So it's an interesting name for that as well. But the fact that they're doing what Clinton did during his term, where he took 150 TV networks and brought them down to 6. So here we're taking all this open source, amazing AI development, globally, and we're bringing it down to 5 companies that are all kind of owned by the same entity, that are the only ones that have the ability to go above and beyond what we're dealing with the standardized of AI right now.
Have you seen this movie Subservience with Megan Fox on Netflix? That is she's basically a sex robot.
I have not. Well, hey, there we go. Right back to it.
Which also gets into like the Raelianism. Have you ever looked into Raelianism and the Raelianism?
I have. That's a dirty word and got Kanye West in trouble, didn't it? But the guy who started it, he was a Indy 500 driver from France or from Belgium. He was given a symbol of the swastika meets the Saturnian star, the Star of David, and he amalgamized both of them together. And then he walks around kind of like Klaus Schwab from Davos Group, wearing these weird puffy space alien outfits. But his second in command, her name is Bouchelet or something like this. They were some of the first people to start talking about cloning. And this was back in the 80s, about actually cloning human beings. And they cloned this little girl they called Eve. And nothing has come out of this since, but I've always found that fascinating, that they were talking about, cloning when cloning was obviously very illegal during those time periods. And so now, nowadays, gene sequencing isn't as illegal as it was. I mean, we're doing stem cell research. Stem cell, in a sense, is a way of cloning. But for
There
her
was
to
a
come
lot of
out,
things about cloning in the late 90s, like a lot
right?
of weird stuff. Like Bill Clinton was like passing legislation to make it to where you can't
And so
clone
did Obama.
human
Obama
beings.
did the same thing. Yeah.
Like that's so weird. Like why would you pass legislation if you can't even do it yet? Doesn't make any sense. But also the Raelianism cult also was like sex robots as well, which is a giant sex cult. The Rael was just having sex with all the women, as any cult leader does. You got to have sex with all the women. But that's what he claimed, was that the Elohim came and picked him up on their ship, and he went up to their home planet, and they had all these like sex robots that he could just have endless amount of sex. So then he like supposedly was teaching these Earth women, Asian Earth women, to please Elohim whenever they land in 2035.
Ah, wow. The drugs were great back then, weren't they?
Something he was doing, something. Scotty Boy, that was actually this year. Well, last year, the movie came out in 2024.
Yeah, I'll have to
Yeah.
look into that. I just sadly discontinued my Netflix, but I still think I still have another month on it, so
It's
I'll
so
definitely look into
expensive,
that.
dude. It's getting
Yeah.
ridiculously expensive, and they're also getting ready to hike the price up again. I just got an email the other day that they're getting ready to do another price hike on it. Like, bro, we're already paying $18 a month
Yeah.
for ad free. And the only thing that ever goes up is the ad free versions of all of it. Like the base one doesn't go up, where you get 20 ads in one freaking show of television. That one never goes up. That stays at $6.99.
I'm so glad I don't own a TV. It's funny, I'll go out, hang out with my friends at the bar every once in a while, and the TV is on. I'll just sit there and stare at it. And just watching the advertisements, it's like, okay, you're selling some sort of toxic chemical that goes in your house to clean something. You're selling some sort of toxic big pharma that's going in your body to fix something, but when you read the 3,000 list of side effects, why would you ever want to take it? They're selling you the most ridiculous toxic food on the planet. All those fast food restaurants are the ones advertising on there, so nothing in the advertisements is beneficial to any of us, and it's mind-blowing to even watch.
Yeah, and I feel like they just make shit up too.
Well,
Just
this
make
is
shit.
this is the problem I have, unfortunately, with the organics industry. 10 years ago, there were hardly any organic products. Well, now everything has an organic or a non-GMO label slapped on it, and none of us have the ability to actually go out and test any of this. And then, you ask these farmers what they have to jump through to go through these tests. Well, you can raise GMO crop as organic and call it organic. You also basically, what's going into your water system, what's going into your soil. I mean, if the crop is raised organically, your soil doesn't need to be organic. Your water system could be as polluted as anything coming, 3 farms upstream that are just using the most toxic chemicals. We don't know, but everything now is labeled organic. It's mind blowing to me. It's like, but how much of it really is? So support your local market, support your local farmers. Obviously, if something's being shipped through, 15 different distilleries across the United States or elsewhere, you don't know where it's coming from. You have no idea what it is.
Well, there is a way to figure that out now. It's an app called Yuka. You
There's
can
always an app for it.
Well, you can get it's a freaking handy app. Like this app has saved me
What's
a lot of time. It's
what's it called?
Yuka,
Yucca? All right.
Yuka. I've been using it for like 2 years now. I used it
All
as soon
right.
as it came out. I was one of the first people on it. I was on it like Donkey Kong, baby. But it basically, you just scan the barcode of any product, any food product. It doesn't do like supplements and things like that, but it'll tell you the additives in it. It'll give you the sugar, the calories, everything, like it's a protein amount, and then it gives a rated base on a scale from 0 to 100. And using this app has like taught me like which ingredients are harmful and which aren't, and I don't even really have to use it anymore. I can just look at the back of the package and see what's in it. But what's interesting with using this app, and I believe 100% that it's accurate, uh, is that some of the like the brands that some grocery stores carry are like the not the name brand stuff, but like Walmart, right? You go to Walmart and they got their great value section, like the ones that they have branded the Walmart brand. Some of those brands for like canned goods and like pasta sauce and stuff like that are better than the name brand organic stuff. It's wild.
The one thing
But
I'm noticing in a lot of the organic stuff I've been, packaged stuff I've been buying is how many seed oils are in them. It's like, oh, organic safflower oil. It's like, even though it says organic, it's still safflower oil. It's
yeah,
like so bad for you. It's unbelievable that they just pump this stuff in there. So
hopefully that'll change. I
yes,
hope that it'll change. Scotty Boy says if you can't read the words on the package, it's not good for you.
so I'm at
Sodium
my
benzoyl
I'm
trimethylchlorophene.
I'm at my gym and I forgot my soap. And so I'm using the pink soap at the gym, in the shower, and I get this rash on my arm, and I'm like,
Yep.
"Oh God, what's that from?" And
Yep.
so I asked the manager of the gym, "Can you, for compliance and ADA compliance, can you post a list of the ingredients of whatever is in the soap that you're using? Because I'm obviously hypoallergenic to it." And he sends me the list, and I only recognize one ingredient on it: Red 33.
Yep.
Everything else was some random chemical, and I'm like, "Oh my God, what is this?"
Red 33 and yellow. What's the other one? Yellow 40 or something like that?
Yellow 6 and yellow
Yellow.
40, which
Yeah.
they both come from cadmium, which is a radioactive byproduct. A lot of that yellow dye also goes into tattoo ink. So people getting colored tattoos, avoid them like the plague, because a lot of those colors are incredibly toxic. Throwing that out there.
Well, I'm
Uh,
lucky that I got most of mine are black and white.
yeah, black and
Gray,
white's the way to
wash.
go, right? Yeah.
Gray wash. I kind of wanted to do what's that tattoo technique where it's not from Tibet. It's where it's like the
Oh,
long, like the stick and poke tattoo where they have like the
that's
long thing in the
they do that in South America. They also do it in Japan, where they'll use a
Japan. Yes.
bamboo. The guy that did my tattoo, I went to Japan and studied how to do that traditionally, and his stuff is so amazing. It's all black and white. He mixes kind of an Asian and Native American style together because he's a Native American guy, but he really got into Asian art when he was over there. And his tattoos are mind blowing. Good luck getting on his table. His name's Cheyenne Sawyer, amazing graphic and tattoo artist. But he's got like a waiting list of 5 years just to get on his tattoo. Yeah,
Have you had it done before?
tattoo. I've had it. Yeah,
Like
I've
one of
never.
those
No,
stick
not
poke?
not 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 the stick poke. But I remember when he went and did that, and I was pretty blown away with his portfolio when he came back. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how sophisticated you could get with it, but I don't know if you could do like a portrait or something like that with a stick and poke. But I've seen some really good ones. A lot of like geometry you can do really well with the stick and pokes. But there's a different
Oh,
kind of stick and poke as well, like the kind that you just do yourself with a with a needle and some ink.
Once we kind of superstructured this show around Egypt, we could get into some of the Cometian philosophy, I guess, because I like to talk a little bit about that sometimes. So
The Cometian philosophy, yeah. Also, the Dropa or the Dropa as well. You mentioned them a few times already, and you wrote your book on this. I think their names are different depending on what period of time and what part of the earth they call them different names. Sort of like with the Anunnaki and Inky and Enlil and all that. They all have different names depending on which region they're from. So the pronunciation is a little bit different. That's correct, right?
yes, it's a transliteration of sorts. And so when I first started researching the story, I realized that this small 4 foot or less tall group of nomads have come out of what is now central China, but used to be far eastern Com Tibet. They're known as the Dropa. In central Tibet, they're known as the Zopa. When you get into Bhutan, northern India, and Nepal, they're known as the Drokpa. And the further west you go, Ladakh, Kashmir, Afghanistan, up into the Caspian and Black Sea region, they're known as the Brokpa. but it's all the same group of people. They speak a dialect that's 2 to 3,000 years older than Sanskrit. So you're looking at, a 7 to 8,000 year dialect here called Shina. About 2,000 people speak it in the world today. It's a gendered language like Thai or Spanish. It has a male and a female tongue to it, and it has a hierarchical tongue to it. So there's a child's voice, there's a common voice, and then there's a royal voice to it. They were forced out of this region of Tibet in the 1950s when the Chinese invaded they swept into the most remote regions of Tibet, which were known as the Bayankara Ula mountain range around Bayan Harshan. This whole area is what was called Kham Tibet. It has some really interesting other features there. There's a valley in southern Kham Tibet that has 11 or 12 of these, they're probably 15-story towers that basically stretch the valley. I would love to see a satellite scatter of this from above, because it would show if there was a star map that they were replicating. But each one of these towers is shaped like a star fort, which is interesting. And people say, oh, they were used to see if marauders were coming up the valley. Well, that makes sense, but why would you need 12 of them? What's the significance of that? And so, you're looking at my Lulu. So all my books are available at lulu.com. I've got, Dropa Legends and Lore, which was my first book. My second book was called The Magic of Symbols, where I get into symbology across the ages of time. A lot of it's now found in corporate logos and in film, even, and media. And so you were talking earlier about this double speak with these secret societies. Well, there's also double speak found within symbology, where we see a symbol as one thing, but those in the know see it as an esoteric symbol of something completely different. And then my most recent book is called Lost Mysteries of Kemet, The Land Before the Greeks, where I get into a lot of the Cometian philosophy that was passed down to me through Stephen Mailer, Patricia Iwan Lehman, Yusuf Iwan, and unfortunately I never got to meet him, but Yusuf's father, Hakim Abdel Iwan. And for those of you who've ever seen the Pyramid Code, he's kind of the elderly Egyptian gentleman that goes, "You have to listen." But his philosophy in there is pretty amazing. And the Greeks, again, they destroyed so much of the Egyptian or Cometian history to rewrite it as their own. They saw everything as patrilineage, where we see everything as matrilineage. There was more of a matriarchal society there prior to the Greeks than most people want to admit to. And we see this in the naming of the houses. And so there are 5 different houses. There's more than 5, but there's 5 sacred houses. House in the Stuf or hieroglyphic is a broken box with a symbol or a hieroglyph inside of it or below it. And so one of the sacred houses is called Purwur or Purwizar, which is the house of the wise. And so this would have been the house symbol with a man and a cane. And this represented wisdom, knowledge. This was a university or hospital or a place of learning. So this was Purwur or Purwizar. This is where we get the words wizard from, or wise. These all come out of these ancient Cometian words, or Suf language, Suf words. Nothing to do with the Sufi. That's very different. The Suf language is similar to Berber. It's still spoken in parts of Morocco, Algeria, and Mali, Africa as well. And so there's this Suf, in indigenous language that's been taught throughout time. The next would be Perka, which is the house of the body. This is a tomb, right? This is where you bury a body, the Perka, the house of the body, not a pyramid. The pyramids were known as Perneter, the house of nature, or the house of energy. And this is fascinating because the Greeks knew this. They called it the pyramid, which means pyramidos, the fire in the middle. They weren't tombs. They were energy devices. And then you have per ba. And so your ba is usually represented by, so the per ka is represented by 2 hands upright like this, which represented the duality of the body, basically your body double. The pernetter was a handle with an axe head on it, or it looks like a flag. And so this was the house of nature. Your ba is it's your head on top of a bird's body. If you've ever seen the movie Spirited Away, the woman who runs the bathhouse every night turns into a ba. She turns into a bird with her head on it and flies out, into Amun, the darkness of the sun. We'll get into the suns here in a second. And then that's per ba. So per ba was the house of the spirit. So this is a temple. This is a place of worship. But the most important of all the houses was per a. And this was known as the high house. It was the house of the woman. And this is where we get the word pharaoh from. And so scholars that are knowledgeable will say in the time of Pharaoh, there was King so-and-so and King so-and-so. And they're all buried in the Valley of the Kings, not the Valley of the Pharaohs. But lazy scholars will call all of them pharaohs. And I find this incredibly frustrating because if you just scratch under the surface into, even Egyptian history and Commission history, you will realize that per-ah and pharaoh are the same word. And so the pharaoh was the high house of the woman, and she would select her king. And so when you see the pictures, well, I guess you would see the pictures online, but if you see the statues of the king and the queen, she always has her arm around him, not the other way around, as if to say, this is mine, I chose him. And so she would rule over the fertility of the land and the people, and he would rule over the physicality of the land and the people. And this is a unity project, and this was their matriarchy. It wasn't the complete opposite of a patriarchy, but it was considered a unity. And so it's interesting, when the Greeks came in, they just saw it as patrilineage, and they called everybody pharaoh, and they called everybody kings, and it was all these kings lists, when in reality, the kings' names were all just titles, and some of these titles were women's titles. So you got to start looking into that. And then all the names that were handed down, Osiris and Isis and Horus and, Anubis and Ramses, these are all Greek names. These were not any of their original names. So Osiris was Wisser, or Bu-Wisser. That was Osiris. That's where the word wise or Wissir comes from, Wisser. That was what the Greeks heard as Osiris through a transliteration. Isis was Aset. She's the goddess of water and fertility. Ramses was Ramasu, which means the rebirth of the sun. And so on and so forth. And so all these names were titles of people. So Akhenaten's eldest daughter was Maritaten, or Mary Aten. And so Aten is one of the it's the fourth phase of the sun, and it means the enlightened. And Mari, or Mary, means the beloved. So she's the beloved of the enlightened, which was her father, Akhenaten, who went from being Imhotep IV, which means the hidden altar, basically. Amun Hotep. Hotep is an altar, and Amun is the hidden phase of the sun, or darkness. So he was the hidden altar, but he wanted to be known as, the rebirth of the sun, basically. And so he changed his name to Akhenaten, and he changed all of the netters, or the natures, into a monotheistic practice of worshiping the sun. And so when the Hanuti priests came in and they flushed out his family, and they changed, they invaded the capital of Amarna, Maritaten, his daughter, fled. She fled across the Mediterranean with her priest class, and they ended up in Scotland. Well, her real name is Scotia, and Scotland is named after her. And all the Druids of Scotland were all ancient Egyptian or Commission priests before the Hanutis came in. And so that block that the king or the queen gets anointed on in England, that granite slab came from Egypt. I mean, it's from Aswan, and so it's part of the rose granite that was brought over there. But her name was Scotia, and she was known as Mary Aten, or Maritaten. And so his head vizier, his head vizier's title was Pa Ren Nefer, which means the harmony of secret names, because Ren is your secret name in the 9 souls of the afterlife. It is the name of your secret spirit. The Pa Ren Nefer is the harmony of the secret names, and he was the head vizier or advisor to Akhenaten. Well, his real name was Ramasu, or Ramses, right? And Ramasu means the rebirth of the sun. Well, this was the second monotheist, or whatever, monotheist in a sense. And this is the character in biblical terms we call Moses, which again was a Greek name. But his
all these people,
real name was Ramasu.
All of them is not their original name. See, that's where people are like, oh, well, Jesus wasn't really Jesus' name, which is true, but all of their names weren't their real names.
No, not at all. They're titles, and then they just change over time. Memphis, Men-Nefer, Tanis was called Tawin, or there's another Dejanet was the other name for it, which also deals with fertility. And so all these names, all of the history that we've been given of Egypt is all Greek history. Some of it's a little bit of Roman because the Romans were there after the Greeks, and some of it is Arabic because the Arabs were there after the Romans, which is where we get Cairo instead of Memphis or Mednafir. It's now Al Qahira, right? So it's Cairo. But it's just interesting that when the conquering class comes in, they rewrite the history, and so only 50% of it is correct. Well, if we've been a planet at war for say 4,000 years, okay, every time there's a conquering, our history reduces by a half. Okay, so after 128 wars, we have no history on this planet, none, zero, zilch. It's all made up. So, what actually are we? Yeah, what are we looking at? And so
That's
when the
wild
Greek,
because with these people that worship these entities or these, historical figures, like you gotta have their name right.
correct,
Because if you don't have their name right, then you're essentially giving your praise and worship and your thanks and your energy to an entity that technically doesn't exist.
right? And this goes into the five phases of the sun. In Christianity, we say Amen at the end of prayer, right? In Islam, they say Amin. But this word comes from Amun. And so Amun is the fifth phase of the sun. So the sun starts out in the morning. A lot of people call it the Kefir sun. Kefir is a dung beetle or the scarab, and it rolls the ball of dung up with its larva inside of it on top of a sand mound. So when the sun rises, it cooks the ball of dung, which hatches the larvae, and then they have something to eat. And so this was known as the Kefir cycle, the recycle of Kefir. But the actual first phase of the sun was called Sahra, and Sahra means the birth of the sun. So that's phase one. The second phase of the sun is what we've all learned in Egyptian history as what they called the sun, and that's Ra. Well, Ra is the adolescent sun. It's the sun with the angry, it's the angry sun. It has the vibes coming out of the circle. Basically, that's how it's depicted in the hieroglyphs. And so it's the adolescent sun. It's the sun before noon when everything's starting to boil and heat up, right? Then you have the third phase of the sun, and this is called Un, and this or Un or On. And un or on is where we get the word on. You flip the light switch on, right? On star in corporate logos, on and star. I mean,
Anu.
yeah, Anu. It's all right there in front of us. But this was considered the wise sun, and so this is the sun in the afternoon, the early afternoon. The fourth phase of the sun was called Aten, and this is the enlightened sun. And this is, if you're a surfer, a snowboarder, or a skateboarder, this is that sunset session. Like the perfect time to be out on the water. It's like 4 to 5 p.m. It's not too hot. You get the golden rays of the sun. You can actually look at the sun. You have, beautiful scenery around you. This is the enlightened sun. And all of our life, we go through these different phases. We're born, so we are Sara. We go through adolescence, so we are Ra. We're angry. We become wise, in our mid 30s, early 40s. So this is our Un phase. Unity, right? Un, in a sense. Then we become enlightened toward, our sunset years, or this is where it is basically. And this is our phase of Aten. And then we go into darkness and deception and the hidden veil, which was called Amun. Well, this is where Amen and Amin come from. So when you're praying to the Almighty high above you and you want your prayer to be heard, you say, blah, 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 this is my prayer, Amen. Well, what you're really saying is hide my prayer in darkness so nobody will ever hear it. And so again, you have this total flip on what we're being told and what we're being taught. And it's interesting. I like to reference movies a lot. And so you look at George Lucas's Skywalker, okay? Well, the main character, his name is Luke Skywalker. Well, Luke is the shorthand for Lucius or Lucifer, the light bearer, who walks across the sky, okay? So this is the sun going through its phases. In A New Hope or Star Wars, the first movie, Luke is wearing all white. In Empire Strikes Back, he's wearing gray. And in Return of the Jedi, he's wearing all black. And so he has gone through his light transformation. And on the horizon of his blackened phase, he meets his dark father, Darth Vader, and they battle through the darkness until he vanquishes his father with a new light, right? because his father becomes a light body. And at the end of Return of the Jedi, Anakin Skywalker, Yoda, and Obi-Wan are all standing there as light bodies because they've all been vanquished through this period of darkness, or Amun, into a new enlightened body. And so this is the story of the Skywalker saga that I don't think people put together, because they see more of the Joseph Campbell side of it, the hero with 1,000 faces, but they don't see the esoteric side of it as well. And so you can get into a movie like The Last Jedi, horrible movie, but there's some pretty fascinating esoteric knowledge in that. Rey falls down into the pit. There's the pit. It's the underworld, right? In a sense, as above, so below. And while she's down there, she looks into a scrying mirror to discover her own past. And that scrying mirror creates that infinity of her where she's snapping her fingers. And then she eventually comes to the mirror itself, and she asks to see who she is or who her parents are, and she sees herself. And so this is a scrying mirror. And so the ancients would use these pieces of obsidian or polished stone, and they would go into scrying sessions to try and predict future events. Well, that's huge esoteric knowledge there. And then you have Luke astral projecting himself from Octo all the way across the galaxy to the planet of Crate, where his physical energetic form appears to fight off Kylo Ren one last time. This doesn't deplete his energy. I mean, it depletes his energy, but it doesn't kill him the way that we would think he would die. And so we see him levitating, here's the levitation, above the projection platform on Octo, and he disappears and his cloak lands back on the platform. Well, it's interesting because he's staring into the twin westing suns of Octo. Well, the twin suns are a direct reference to Sirius, because in Masonic tradition, Sirius is considered the blazing star. To the Buddhists, it's the brightest star that rises on the horizon. To the Muslims, it's basically part of their Hajj, because Sirius will rise with Canis Major toward the end of July, early August, above the horizon, and this is when the Hajj happens in Mecca. And so you have Saturnian and goddess symbology, and even Saturnian goddess and Syrian symbology right there, all at Mecca, because the black cube, the Kaaba, or the body soul building, right? If we were to look at it in Commission terms, Kaaba, right? It also means cube, and it's a black cube. Well, it wasn't originally a Muslim temple. It was commissioned by the Queen of Sheba. So this is, it was for goddess worship, and it was usurped. And so sitting in the eastern corner of it, facing Sirius rising on the east, is the Kaaba stone, which is considered a piece of the Sintamani stone, in a sense. It's a piece of meteorite that fell from the clouds from Sirius, just like the Sintamani stone did. And it grants its possessor incredible luck, fortune, and, like the Philosopher's Stone in a sense, longevity of life. And so, if you're Muslim, you will go at one point in your life to Mecca to do your pilgrimage. You walk around the Kaaba building 7 times counterclockwise, which is funny because I believe the rings of Saturn also go in a counterclockwise position. And then eventually you make your way toward the eastern corner, where you're allowed once in your lifetime to touch the Kaaba stone. Well, it's fascinating that when Oculus and Metaverse first came out, they built a fake Kaaba stone and Kaaba enclosure and put people in Oculus masks, so they didn't have to go to Mecca to touch the stone. They could just put on their Oculus and go up to this thing and touch it. And so here we're diverting, these sacred traditions again with technology. And so, yeah, this.
Wow, it's some mind-blowing stuff. And not only with Rey looking in the mirror and seeing herself, but there was also a form of that in The Empire Strikes Back, whenever Luke was training with Yoda and he goes into the cave
The
and
cave, right?
encounters Darth Vader, and then his mask blows up and he sees himself underneath the mask.
Right. And it's interesting. Also in Empire, we get the physical nuts and bolts Merkaba chamber, which is a Merkaba is 2 tetrahedrons upside down, spinning in alternate directions. This makes up what the Star of David was. It's also Solomon's sigil. It was made out of brass and iron, and the energy that it would create in between this vortex energy could either ensnare or protect entities. I mean, that's how Solomon was using all of his sigils in a sense. And so that shape inside of those 2 spinning vortices is an octahedron, and this is the shape of Darth Vader's meditational chamber. And while he's
Mm.
inside of it, he's able to take off his helmet without dying. Because you remember in Return of the Jedi, he's like, "Let me take off my mask and stare upon you with my own eyes." And Luke says, "But it will kill you." Well, because he's not in his Merkabah chamber. In that chamber, the energy in that chamber allows him to remove his suit and heal his wounds. He can also telepathically communicate with Luke, his son, with the Emperor, and with other Jedi and Sith practitioners. But this is a physical nuts and bolts Merkabah energy device. It's allowing him to astral project to other portions of the galaxy through his mind, basically. So it's
Wow,
all
that's
right there in
incredible.
front of us if we want to look at it. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, that's really incredible. I had another thought that I just lost because that Darth Vader thing was super intriguing. Um,
Yeah,
so
Scotty says Merkabah. Well, here we have these words again. Mer is a representation of water. So it's a water energy that affects your body and your spiritual field. So, or a liquefied energy in a sense, Murakaba, which it's such an interesting word because that's directly borrowed from the Commission and Suf language, as is a lot of things. So anyway, I just saw that in the post go by. Yes,
yeah, Scotty
yeah, there it
boy.
just came up. Yeah,
Yeah, that's really wild. Yeah, the Star Wars connection because a lot of people, like you said, they're like hero's journey and all that, but they don't really look at it in like the occult and esoteric
much
way
more going on there.
of the sun cycles.
Yeah, so
But
much
oh,
going
that's
on
what I
there.
was going to say. So the occult practitioners, like when you're talking about Luke going through these phases, and then Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, Yoda, and Obi-Wan showing up at the end because they've achieved like their light body. Is that not the goal of like occult practitioners? Is to go through the darkness in order to pop out the other side?
You do the work. I mean, you're not going to become enlightened just going through your life and screwing everybody over. You have to go through the phases of your own sun in your own body. You have to experience that. That's kind of what we were talking about at the beginning. If we were all knowing and all encompassing, why would we even be here? I mean, life wouldn't really have to be in a physical form unless there was something that it might not be anything. It might just be, the natural course of all life. But there's something that we all go through the course of our own lives where, we have to reach a state of our own enlightenment. We have to go through our own darkness. We have to do our own work in order to come out the other side as light. There is a lot of shadow work to be done, and we're still having to do it. All of us have to do this.
That was the other thing. That was another thought, but I had another one. So a lot of the temples and a lot of the worship places, especially in Japan, I'm not too familiar with some of the other ones in other countries, but they all have a mirror in them
Hmm.
so that you can look at yourself and in the center of the temple, in the center of the worship area, is there's always a mirror, and
Well,
that's
that's
like
the
a
same thing
self.
we do this every day. I mean, I'm sure everybody gets up and they look in the mirror and they ask themselves questions. What am I doing? Oh, God, what have I done? This, that, or I've got this. Empowering statements, and we all reflect upon ourselves through those mirrors. And I don't know if you've ever put a cat in front of a mirror, but they kind of, they don't want to look at themselves in the mirror. It's very interesting. They don't want to see that reflection, and so
Yeah.
yeah, I think we're the ones that look at that and we kind of see that. And speaking of mirrors, you look at this word Maya, which is, I mean, Maya is a Hindu word, it's a Mesoamerican word, and it's also a Commission Suf word. And in all three phases, it means water. But in Hindi, especially, it also means illusion. So when you're looking at your reflection in the water, you're actually seeing an illusion of yourself. And so this is that reflection of Maya. Well, it also means love. Well, to many people, love is an illusion. You've got to love yourself, your reflection, who you are, whether it's an external reflection or an internal reflection, before you can go out and love anybody else. Because if you haven't done that work, you're bringing your crappy energy onto somebody else's plate. and you're projecting it on them, and vice versa. And we've gotten so stuck in material possession and material reflection that we don't recognize, how ugly we can be to ourselves internally. I think we all need to stop and go ground ourselves with the earth, walk outside, put your feet in the dirt, connect.
Go
You'll
hiking, bro. Go
go
hiking.
hiking, get those micronutrients in your lungs from the forest or from wherever you go. Just get out of these cities, because the cities are just, they're grid structures, and they're not set up properly. I mean, all of our piping systems are square and angular, but in nature you don't see angular water systems. Everything has a flow to it. And so when you're in somewhere like Switzerland or Austria in Europe, they build a lot of their houses with that flow of water intent versus angular structured piping. Everything has a flow. Most of the piping systems are angled at a downhill slope so that they can flow through your house naturally without having to be pumped. And we don't do that here. Everything is just this angular broken grid structure. And so yeah, definitely get out, and go see things. Get out of the library, get into the field, as Indiana Jones always says. And
Angel, Angle,
right.
Electric, Elohim. Yeah, it's all, I think it's all coded in our language. Thanks so much, Hans. Really appreciate it, brother. It's a
Yeah.
wonderful and fascinating conversation. Can you let people know where they can find you online, plug your website? I'm actually going to pull your website up here
So
while
my
you're talking
website's
about it.
called Megalithic Mysteries, or Megamist. I have some of my adventures on there. I'm still updating it. It's just there's a lot of time that I haven't had recently, and this year is kind of being dedicated to doing some of that. I also review a lot of movies. I get into small blog posts about esoteric stuff in movies, as well as my travels. These are my 3 books. You can find them on my website, but they link off to lulu.com, where I'm self-published. I think they run, it's like $25 a piece. They're about 180 pages. They're introductories to these topics, but kind of my deep dive into some of the knowledge that I've gotten into them. I also sell shirts and artwork that I've done at different sites that I've been at, where I've redrawn some of these sculptures and structures and then put my own flair and twist into them. The shirt I'm wearing right now is one that I've designed as well. And then this is, yeah, my blogs on different movies. So I get into Star Wars, Total Recall, all sorts of stuff. I keep finding stuff, and it pops out at me more and more when I go through movies, and I'm like, oh, I got to write that one down. I just did one about the new Star Wars skeleton crew, borrowing heavily from National Geographic. And so on and so forth. So Megalithic Mysteries, or megamist.com for shorthand of that. I'll be speaking early February at Conscious Life Expo. I was supposed to be in the rabbit hole room, but I think I'm in the room next to it. So that's Friday the 7th. I'll be there from noon until 1:15. And then I'll be hanging out, networking with everybody else. I'll have all my books there for sale. And I look forward to meeting people there. I then will be at Alien Event and Biomed Expo in the middle of April. I'm also in LA. That will be at, I believe it's at the Sonista. I'm not quite sure off the top of my head. And then I speak in New Mexico in August, and hoping to get some other events going and some other speaking gigs. But it's often difficult because I do full-time graphic design. I work for some pretty big clients, and breaking away from a 15 to 20-hour day schedule sometimes is difficult. And yeah.
I feel that, bro. As an editor, holy crap, there's so much to do and not enough hours in the day. Really quickly, JK says, is breathing a technology? Absolutely, it is. You can get into all kinds of different states of consciousness through doing breath work. I've done it. I've come really close to getting outside of my body, and you can literally unlock natural DMT in your brain without actually
Yes.
doing DMT.
Even going to a sound bath or sound healing can do that. I mean, if you're sitting in front of those bowls while they're oscillating them, you will crack into your pineal gland like you've never felt. You'd be like, what was that? Whoa, I just had a rush of conscious energy I've never felt before. But yeah, so that's mostly where you can find me. I do graphic design and multimedia for a lot of clients. I like to help out people in this field and industry as well, because there's a lot of presenters, and I see a lot of ways that they could improve on their presentations and make them a little more succinct. So you're not reading, hundreds of millions of words on a screen, and they can actually talk to more of a visual presentation. So if anybody's interested in graphic art and graphic design, please look me up. And otherwise, that's where you can find me. And I appreciate this time with you, Ryder. This has been great. We'll have to do it again and get into some other topics. But yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. We could probably talk for a couple more hours, but we've been running for a little over 2 hours here. And thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. Appreciate everyone in the chat. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel and the algorithms. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.